Hello and welcome to the Credible Faith Show. I'm your host, Dr. Paul D. Larson, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at part 1 of 3 of the section Preparatory Considerations of William Paley's classic apologetics work, A View of the Evidences of Christianity. Preparatory Considerations. I deem it unnecessary to prove that mankind stood in need of revelation, because I have met with no serious person who thinks that even under the Christian revelation, we have too much light, or any degree of assurance which is superfluous. Footnote. This is the common-sense view of the question, and is given with the author's characteristic plainness. Learned discussion would only perplex it. But such discussion is not wanting. See Leland on the, quote, necessity of a divine revelation, end quote, in which work the religion and morality of the ancient heathens is fully considered. Philosophy had been permitted to try her skill in theology and ethics during a period of 4,000 years, and failed. This was surely experiment enough. In the fullness of time, when the insufficiency of human reason had been practically and decisively demonstrated, revelation was completed, and the divine command issued for its universal promulgation. The student is referred to Alexander's Evidences of Christianity, chapters 3 and 4, where the attempts of modern philosophy in the same field are admirably handled, and the necessity of a divine revelation proved from the nature of the case. See note A at the end of this chapter. Editor. End footnote. I desire, moreover, that in judging of Christianity, it may be remembered that the question lies between this religion and none. For, if the Christian religion be not credible, no one with whom we have to do will support the pretensions of any other. Footnote. By religions are here meant Christianity and the various other systems, heathen and Mohammedan. The religion of nature, so far as it goes, is coincident with that of revelation. See Butler's analogy. But the religion of nature is imperfect, and cannot, by any means, be substituted for the religion of Christ. Moreover, the lessons of nature, when read in the light of Christianity, and when read without that light, are very different things. See note B at the end of this chapter. Editor. End footnote. Suppose, then, the world we live in to have had a creator. Suppose it to appear, from the predominant aim and tendency of the provisions and contrivances observable in the universe, that the deity, when he formed it, consulted for the happiness of his sensitive creation. Suppose the disposition which dictated this counsel to continue. Footnote. See Paley's Natural Theology. Editor. End footnote. Suppose a part of the creation to have received faculties from their Maker, by which they are capable of rendering a moral obedience to his will, and of voluntarily pursuing any end for which he has designed them. Suppose the Creator to intend for these, his rational and accountable agents, a second state of existence, in which their situation will be regulated by their behavior in the first state. By which supposition, and by no other, the objection to the divine government in not putting a difference between the good and the bad, and in the inconsistency of this confusion with the care and benevolence discoverable in the works of the deity is done away. Suppose it to be of the utmost importance to the subjects of this dispensation to know what is intended for them. That is, suppose the knowledge of it to be highly conducive to the happiness of the species, a purpose which so many provisions of nature are calculated to promote. Suppose, nevertheless, almost the whole race, either by the imperfection of their faculties, the misfortune of their situation, or by the loss of some prior revelation, to want this knowledge, and not to be likely without the aid of a new revelation to attain it. Under these circumstances, is it improbable that a revelation should be made? Is it incredible that God should interpose for such a purpose? Suppose him to design for mankind a future state. Is it unlikely that he should acquaint him with it? Now, in what way can a revelation be made but by miracles? In none which we are able to conceive. Footnote. This also is a characteristic and common-sense statement of the question, and will weigh more with a mass of honest men than 100 abstract speculations on the nature, possibility, probability, and credibility of miracles, and on the relation which miracles bear to divine revelation. Of such abstract arguments, however, there are plenty for those who want them. See note C at the end of this chapter, editor, and footnote. Consequently, in whatever degree it is probable, or not very improbable, that a revelation should be communicated to mankind at all, in the same degree is it probable, or not very improbable, that miracles should be wrought. Therefore, when miracles are related to have been wrought in the promulgating of a revelation manifestly wanted, and if true of inestimable value, the improbability which arises from the miraculous nature of the things related is not greater than the original improbability that such a revelation should be imparted by God. I wish it, however, to be correctly understood in what manner and to what extent this argument is alleged. We do not assume the attributes of the deity or the existence of a future state in order to prove the reality of miracles. That reality always must be proved by evidence. We assert only that in miracles adduced in support of revelation, there is not any such antecedent improbability as no testimony can surmount. And for the purpose of maintaining this assertion, we contend that the incredibility of miracles related to have been wrought in attestation of a message from God, conveying intelligence of a future state of rewards and punishments, and teaching mankind how to prepare themselves for that state, is not in itself greater than the event, call it either probable or improbable, of the two following propositions being true, namely, first, that a future state of existence should be destined by God for his human creation, and, secondly, that, being so destined, he should acquaint them with it. It is not necessary, for our purpose, that these propositions be capable of proof, or even that, by arguments drawn from the light of nature, they can be made out to be probable. It is enough that we are able to say concerning them that they are not so violently improbable, so contradictory to what we already believe of the divine power and character, that either the propositions themselves, or facts strictly connected with the propositions, and therefore no farther improbable than they are improbable, ought to be rejected at first sight, and to be rejected by whatever strength or complication of evidence they be attested. This is the prejudication we would resist, for to this length does a modern objection to miracles go, viz., that no human testimony can in any case render them credible. I think the reflection above stated, that if there be a revelation, there must be miracles, and that under the circumstances in which the human species are placed, a revelation is not improbable or not improbable in any great degree, to be a fair answer to the whole objection. But since it is an objection which stands in the very threshold of our argument, and, if admitted, is a bar to every proof, and to all future reasoning upon the subject, it may be necessary, before we proceed farther, to examine the principle upon which it professes to be founded, which principle is concisely this, that it is contrary to experience that a miracle should be true, but not contrary to experience that testimony should be false. Now, there appears a small ambiguity in the term, quote, experience, end quote, and in the phrases, quote, contrary to experience, end quote, or, quote, contradicting experience, end quote, which it may be necessary to remove in the first place. Strictly speaking, the narrative of a fact is then only contrary to experience when the fact is related to have existed at a time and place, at which time and place we, being present, did not perceive it to exist. As if it should be asserted that in a particular room, and at a particular hour of a certain day, a man was raised from the dead, in which room, and at the time specified, we, being present and looking on, perceived no such event to have taken place. Here the assertion is contrary to experience properly so called, and this is a contrariety which no evidence can surmount. It matters nothing whether the fact be of a miraculous nature or not. But although this be the experience, and the contrariety which Archbishop Tillotson alleged in the quotation with which Mr. Hume opens his essay, it is certainly not that experience, nor that contrariety, which Mr. Hume himself intended to object. And short of this, I know no intelligible signification which can be affixed to the term, quote, contrary to experience, end quote, but one, viz., that of not having ourselves experienced anything similar to the thing related, or such things not being generally experienced by others. I say, quote, not generally, end quote, for to state concerning the fact in question that no such thing was ever experienced, or that universal experience is against it, is to assume the subject of the controversy. Now, the improbability which arises from the want, for this properly is a want, not a contradiction, of experience, is only equal to the probability there is that, if the thing were true, we should experience things similar to it, or that such things would be generally experienced. Suppose it then to be true that miracles were wrought on the first promulgation of Christianity, when nothing but miracles could decide its authority. Is it certain that such miracles would be repeated so often, and in so many places, as to become objects of general experience? Is it a probability approaching to certainty? Is it a probability of any great strength or force? Is it such as no evidence can encounter? And yet, this probability is the exact converse, and therefore the exact measure, of the improbability which arises from the want of experience, and which Mr. Hume represents as invincible by human testimony. It is not like alleging a new law of nature, or a new experiment in natural philosophy, because when these are related, it is expected that, under the same circumstances, the same effect will follow universally. And in proportion as this expectation is justly entertained, the want of a corresponding experience negatives the history. But to expect concerning a miracle that it should succeed upon repetition is to expect that which would make it cease to be a miracle, which is contrary to its nature as such, and would totally destroy the use and purpose for which it was wrought. The force of experience, as an objection to miracles, is founded in the presumption either that the course of nature is invariable, or that, if it ever be varied, variations will be frequent and general. Has the necessity of this alternative been demonstrated? Permit us to call the course of nature the agency of an intelligent being, and is there any good reason for judging this state of the case to be probable? Ought we not rather to expect that such a being, on occasions of peculiar importance, may interrupt the order which he had appointed, yet that such occasions should return seldom, that these interruptions consequently should be confirmed to the experience of a few, that the want of it, therefore, in many, should be matter neither of surprise nor objection? But as a continuation of the argument from experience, it is said that when we advance accounts of miracles, we assign effects without causes, or we attribute effects to causes inadequate to the purpose, or to causes of the operation of which we have no experience. Of what causes, we may ask, and of what effects does the objection speak? If it be answered that when we ascribe the cure of the palsy to a touch, of blindness to the anointing of the eyes with clay, or the raising of the dead to a word, we lay ourselves open to this imputation. We reply that we ascribe no such effects to such causes. We perceive no virtue or energy in these things more than in other things of the same kind. They are merely signs to connect the miracle with its end. The effect we ascribe simply to the volition of the deity, of whose existence and power, not to say of whose presence and agency, we have a previous and independent proof. We have, therefore, all we seek for in the works of rational agents, a sufficient power and inadequate motive. In a word, once believe that there is a God, and miracles are not incredible. Mr. Hume states the case of miracles to be a contest of opposite improbabilities, that is to say, a question whether it be more improbable that the miracles should be true, or the testimony false, and this I think a fair account of the controversy. But herein I remark a want of argumentative justice, that, in describing the improbability of miracles, he suppresses all those circumstances of extenuation which result from our knowledge of the existence, power, and disposition of the deity. His concern in the creation, the end answered by the miracle, the importance of that end, and its subserviency to the plan pursued in the work of nature. As Mr. Hume has represented the question, miracles are alike incredible to him who is previously assured of the constant agency of a divine being, and to him who believes that no such being exists in the universe. They are equally incredible, whether related to have been wrought upon occasions the most deserving, and for purposes the most beneficial, or for no assignable end whatever, or for an end confessedly trifling or pernicious. This surely cannot be a correct statement. In adjusting also the other side of the balance, the strength and weight of testimony, this author has provided an answer to every possible accumulation of historical proof by telling us that we are not obliged to explain how the story of the evidence arose. Now I think that we are obliged, not, perhaps, to show by positive accounts how it did, but by a probable hypothesis how it might so happen. The existence of the testimony is a phenomenon. The truth of the fact solves the phenomenon. If we reject this solution, we ought to have some other to rest in, and none, even by our adversaries, can be admitted, which is not consistent with the principles that regulate human affairs and human conduct at present, or which makes men then to have been a different kind of beings from what they are now. But the short consideration, which, independently of every other, convinces me that there is no solid foundation in Mr. Hume's conclusion, is the following. When a theorem is proposed to a mathematician, the first thing he does with it is to try it upon a simple case, and if it produce a false result, he is sure that there must be some mistake in the demonstration. Now, to proceed in this way with what may be called Mr. Hume's theorem, if 12 men, whose probity and good sense I had long known, should seriously and circumstantially relate to me an account of a miracle wrought before their eyes, and in which it was impossible that they should be deceived, if the governor of the country, hearing a rumor of this account, should call these men into his presence, and offer them a short proposal, either to confess the imposture, or submit to be tied up to a gibbet, if they should refuse, with one voice, to acknowledge that there existed any falsehood or imposture in the case, if this threat were communicated to them separately, yet with no different effect, if it was at last executed, if I myself saw them, one after another, consenting to be racked, burnt, or strangled, rather than give up the truth of their account, still, if Mr. Hume's rule be my guide, I am not to believe them. Now I undertake to say that there exists not a skeptic in the world who would not believe them, or who would defend such incredulity. Footnote. This mode of dealing with Hume's celebrated argument is clear, straightforward, businesslike, and eminently English. For more elaborate refutations, read Campbell on Miracles, Chalmers' Evidences, Wardlaw, Alexander, and Dr. Hopkins' Lowell Lectures. In Dr. Alexander's Evidences will be found certain strictures, well worthy of attention, on a volume of essays published in England, quote, on the pursuits of truth, on the progress of knowledge, and the fundamental principles of all evidence and expectation, end quote. It was republished in Philadelphia and lauded by the Westminster Review. Editor. End footnote. Instances of spurious miracles, supported by strong apparent testimony, undoubtedly demand examination. Mr. Hume has endeavored to fortify his argument by some examples of this kind. I hope in a proper place to show that none of them reach the strength or circumstances of the Christian evidence. In these, however, consists the weight of his objection. In the principle itself, I am persuaded, there is none. Note A. Quote, from the entire history of the religions which have existed amongst men independently of revelation, we might demonstrate the need in which the world stood of such an inspired communication from Deity. We might enter into a proof, not in the way of theoretical speculation, but in the only way in which a just conclusion can be adduced, the way which has the sanction of human philosophy in every other department of investigation, namely, by the process of induction, by an appeal to facts, of the truth of the Bible position that, quote, the world by wisdom knew not God, end quote. Such facts there are, without number. They extend through the whole period of our world's existence, and embrace all nations under heaven. If, with so wide and varied a field of facts before them, if, with the experiment under their eye, made in all imaginable variety of circumstances, some of them the most advantageous for a favorable result, and yet invariably yielding the same conclusion, men will be either so disingenuous or so inconsistent with themselves as, while they extol the experimental method of inquiry in every other field, to persist in theorizing in this. We cannot help it. We can only point to the inconsistency and pray them to look at the facts. End quote. Wardlaw on Miracles, pages 17 and 18. End note A.